Okay, I think we're getting started. The Honourable J. Weatherill, Premier of South Australia, Martin Elbourne, the Honourable John Gazzola, the Honourable Tammy Franks, the Honourable Kelly Vincent, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's event on behalf of the Don Dunstan Foundation. We recognise that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people tonight, and we acknowledge their ongoing spiritual connection to this land. We pay our respects to their elders. My name's Simon Malloy. I'm both a musician and an economist, and I see some usual suspects in the audience. Welcome everybody. We're here tonight to discuss the future of music in South Australia. This event is part of the Live Music Residency, a project designed to help create a vibrant and sustainable live music scene here in South Australia. Martin Elbourne is the thinker in residence. He's in Adelaide for his second visit and is working towards a report and a set of recommendations that will be published in September this year. Tonight, we have an opportunity to discuss the overall direction of the recommendations and some of the emerging vision for music in South Australia. In a moment, I'd like to invite the Premier to say a few words about his vision for music in our state, and then we'll move into some panel discussion, and there'll be some time for questions at the end. I'd just like to introduce the other panellists here. I should say that Premier Weatherill is also here in his capacity as Minister for the Arts, which we all know is a special portfolio in this state. Martin Elbourne is the thinker in residence for the Live Music Residency. Dean Ormston, down there on the end, is Head of Corporate Services for APRA and AMCOS with 15 years experience in these organisations. Yeah. Don't be ashamed, it's fine. Millie Milgate is export music producer for Sounds Australia, which is Australia's music export office, and Craig Locke is owner and director of 5-4 Entertainment here in Adelaide. Okay, so now I'd like to invite Premier Weatherill to talk about his vision for the South Australian music scene, and I'd like to emphasise the local music industry's appreciation for your level of engagement, and please tell us your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon, and my parliamentary colleagues, distinguished guests, fellow panellists, ladies and gentlemen. I first should qualify myself. I'm also an economist, and I also, my live music credentials are very poor. I did study classical music, classical guitar at high school, but that was more really associated with a crush I had on the flautist, so it was enrolling in music for a sort of secondary purpose, and I was chief chorister at St Michael's and All Angels, Henley Beach. So there are my live music credentials, which are rather poor and don't stand really to any great scrutiny. But my particular interest in this agenda is because I think the live music agenda is a microcosm of really a broader strategy we have for South Australia, which is about the vibrancy of our capital city. When we chose to make that a central focus for the state, because we believe modern regions compete on the attractiveness of their capital cities, we have seen live music as an important subset of that. And in a minute I'll talk about why I think many of the challenges facing the live music industry are actually very similar to many of the challenges facing our city itself, and many of the solutions are actually the same. But why do we choose the vibrancy of our capital city as one of the 7 priorities for the future of the state? Well, this is something that has actually been thought about before. Back when Don Dunstan was Premier, Treasurer and Arts Minister, when he decided to launch into the creative industries, it wasn't because of some particular affectation he had for the arts, although he indeed had a great love and passion for the arts. It wasn't the pink hot pants and the idea of him wanting to shop South Australians into a particular view of themselves. It was a deliberate and calculated decision to actually broaden the economic base of South Australia. back in 1964, there was a seminal work published called The Lucky Country by Donald Horne. There was an understanding that economies like South Australia needed to actually expand beyond their agrarian base or their secondary industry base to have a more sophisticated tertiary sector. And so this was an economic strategy. Of course, it had all of the aesthetic qualities and advantages of being able to introduce people to a broader range of self-expression. And in the era, it obviously was very much part of the awakening of the capacity of the individual to express themselves. But make no mistake, it was an economic strategy. So the fact that we had the first festival theatre, the first major arts theatre in the nation, was a very large capital investment, but it was off the back of the idea of developing a new set of creative industries. And of course, the public investments from that day to this have been a very important part of the creation of this idea of South Australia as a creative capital. So this idea has been explored in the past, and what I wanted to do when I assumed this role was to take that idea of the capital city as the, if you like, presenter of cultural capital about the state, the image of the state to the world, renew that and refresh it. The truth is, the city of Adelaide is seen by many people as quite staid and conservative. It's one of the reasons why some of our young people choose not to stay here. They choose to leave because more exciting jobs, more interesting, vibrant inner city experiences are available elsewhere. That's why they travel interstate and overseas. So this is a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to elevate it as one of the key priorities for South Australia. So if you reflect back then on live music, what actually does create vibrancy in a city? Well, vibrancy is created by people using a place at different times of the day with different activities. And the truth is, certain parts of our city pretty much collapse down at certain times of the day to being just a bit of an alcoholic swill. And it's not an attractive place for some people. It's not even a safe place for some people. And it precludes other uses. And I imagine a city that's actually full of different types of venues, different types of uses, music, and a crucial part of actually enlivening the city in that way. And so that's why we decided, together with the Don Dunstan Foundation, to launch into this idea of a thinker in residence on live music, because I think it's a critical subset of this idea of a vibrant CBD, and a vibrant CBD is crucial to us projecting an image of South Australia we want to project to the world, and secondly, crucial for the way in which our region will be created and grow. We want to keep the best and brightest in South Australia. We don't want them to have to leave because they don't see an interesting or exciting future for themselves in South Australia. And just as that's the case for people in the live music industry, it's the case more broadly for young people in South Australia. And so I think this is a really crucial opportunity for us. In the discussions that I've had with Martin and just talking about the question of live music, one of the really interesting conceptual leaps for me has been to think of live music as an industry in this way in which we think of other industries. If you actually, once you put that hat on and you actually think of live music in that way, you can actually see that many of the challenges that are facing our other industries are exactly the same issues facing the live music industry. So we published an economic statement back in March, and it talked about the things that were going to make the most difference for South Australia. One of them was this notion of a vibrant city. And we said that there were three things that really needed to change about South Australia in all of our industry sectors. One of them is that we have to be more outward looking, that we have to face the world and make relationships with the rest of the world. The second thing we said that needed to change is that we need to be more innovative, do new things in new ways. And the third thing was this notion of partnership, government, business, the community working together. And each of those things, which we actually constructed as the things that needed to change for industry, so advanced manufacturing, our food industries, our mining services sector, equally applied to this sector in exactly the same way. And it's interesting, I know Martin's been having some really interesting meetings just today with the business and industry part of government. And the truth is we haven't thought of live music in the way in which we think of other industries. And there are a whole range of programs that are available to this sector that could very much meet the needs and deal with the gaps that have been identified in terms of holding back the creation of a thriving live music industry in South Australia. So things like we've set up an industry advocate to make sure that businesses win more government jobs. And we think of that in our construction jobs and those sorts of things. But why not apply it to the government spend in relation to advertising? There's an extraordinary amount of work that's done on different government agencies as they put up their websites and they do promotional materials. Everything from Defence SA through to our food industry, our tourism sector. That's a massive opportunity for us to use the power of the government's procurement to actually drive live music. And there are endless other examples where the usual tools that we can use for our industry sectors can be applied to actually regenerate and allow this sector to take the next step. So I think this is an incredibly exciting agenda. I think it has a hard economic edge. Of course, it also just adds to the joy of life to be able to listen to fantastic live music in and around our city. Just make it an even more interesting place to be, have more people in the city with lots of other different opportunities and activities to engage in. So I'm very pleased to be here and very much looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Just echoing that, I think the penny dropped for me many years ago working as an economist in arts and culture when someone said to me the second biggest export the United States has is entertainment. Right. Aerospace, I think, is first. So I think my first question, I'm going to have to just cross it off now because it's already been answered, which was what are the benefits to the City of Adelaide and the state that flow from having a vibrant music industry or music scene? And I think the Premier's pretty well got the answer to that. Although, if anyone else would like to comment, what are the benefits of having a vibrant music scene? Any thoughts on that, Martin?
No, actually, I thought pretty much agree with everything the Premier said there, really. One, I'd say at the bottom end, I mean, music is one of the best ways of engaging disaffected youth. I know lots of musicians in the UK who make sort of maybe half their income from actually working in training programs. And then at the top end, it's one of the cheapest ways of, every city in the world is trying to create, creative industry clusters, trying to digital startup companies, all the rest of it. And actually music's one of the easiest ways of doing that. It's also one of these days, it's one of you see the results much quicker in music than, say, the film industry. If there's like a cool clip on YouTube, you get those instant things, you can measure these things. And of course, it's a great way of advertising your city around the world. Because once you get to a certain level, I mean, the holy grail these days in music is to have an international live career. And that's not just the musicians, that's also managers and that's also crew and things like that. So, having people actually being employed, going around the world, talking about Adelaide is like pretty cool. So once you start getting it right, it's a win-win-win situation all the way down the line.
Yeah. International profile, yeah. Okay. All right, well, let's just have a talk about what's going on in Adelaide now. Let's just a quick run down the panel, just come up with a suggestion if you want. What's good, what's bad, what could be better about the music scene in Adelaide? Because that's, we've got
Should I be answering that?
Yeah. Well, who wants to go first?
I guess I'm the only one that lives here, other than the Premier, but yeah, so, I mean, in my mind, I think the good things are, there are a hell of a lot of bands actively playing gigs and doing stuff in Adelaide. So that's one thing. We have a lot of venues here that are of quite high standard, which is another good thing that we have going on. But I think overall, in my mind, we need to create an ecosystem that's good for bands getting success and also good for companies that want to start up in Adelaide being successful and being financially viable. So that's probably where we're falling down a little bit in my mind. We don't have great networks, both nationally and internationally. So if you're in a band in Adelaide, it's very difficult to sort of branch out and, you know, break out of Adelaide, for want of a better term, into a national band. So I think we need to, you know, create an ecosystem locally which generates really good bands, and then have an industry which can watch those bands and go, hey, that's great, I'm gonna plug that into this guy in Sydney and this guy in Melbourne, this guy in New York or whatever, and actually help that band go from being a local band to being a national band to being an international band. And that's probably where we're sort of falling over a little bit in my mind. But, you know, these sort of programs, to me, and there are a lot of people in the last couple of years, myself included, that have started their own music business in Adelaide, off their own back, with no help from anyone really, you know, trying to make a go of it and doing great things. So if these people that are doing it on their own right now can get a small amount of support and can link into the national industry, then, you know, there's a pretty big opportunity to actually take ourselves from where we've been the last couple of years to a better place, in my mind.
That's probably a good point. Thanks. So that's a good point to bring Millie in. What are your comments on
Yeah, and
international?
I'm going to just jump straight in from Craig's comment in terms of people doing it on their own. And I think my history with Adelaide artists goes quite a way back. I could probably use the 15 years as well, from working in the university area and booking entertainment there to booking live venues in Sydney and having a number of Adelaide artists coming through year after year to my role now at Sounds Australia. And I think there's just so many inspiring artists, incredibly talented artists and wonderful people all working within the Adelaide industry, the South Australian industry, but it's very much siloed. And I think there's a lot of people that you'll have these conversations with, and it's exciting. I just don't know how much the conversations are going this way in amongst each other. And I think there seems to be a bit of a missing link in terms of the community and the collegiality amongst those that are the players, the people that have been doing some incredible things for many years, often passing that knowledge on down to younger players. And I think there's a little bit of a gap there. Certainly from Sounds Australia's point of view, our role is really to work with all Australian artists when they get invited to the International Showcase arena, and really work with them and help them make the best of that opportunity. And I guess we've really noticed the lack of Adelaide artists getting invited to the events in the first instance, or taking themselves there to really see what it's all about. And I just think there is such an opportunity that I think there's so many people could be tapping into, and it's those platforms and just building those levels as to how to get there. And I guess for us, it's looking at ways to work with the state and hopefully increase the capacity and really see what we can do to assist, and certainly with the commitment across all levels of government here and the thinker.
So better organisation at a higher level.
Yeah, and I think having that spiral down and across, like none of this can happen in isolation. You know, you need all the parts working together, and I think that's something in this state I don't see as much. I see the individuals that are awesome, and I think there just needs to be a little bit more collaborative and collaboration.
Okay, thanks, Millie.
I'd agree with that. I'd say this. I mean, I think we are lacking in the music industry in Adelaide, but there's never been a better opportunity for a place like Adelaide, South Australia, to actually compete on a world level. And obviously, it is about working together. It is about mentoring and things like that. But you know, the reality of the new music industry is, you know, you start with a video clip on YouTube and one song. Obviously, it has to be a good song.
Yes.
So you can get out to the world. Sounds Australia do a fantastic job helping Australian bands go to the now numerous sort of showcase industry festivals around the world. So, you know, it's almost, and I mean, it's never, you know, even just getting to Europe, say, from Adelaide is much easier now than it was. You know, it's almost as cheap flying to London as it is flying to Brisbane or Perth. You know, it's if you get your...
Almost.
And we found out yesterday there's a house in Wimbledon that's owned by the South Australian government.
Don't tell everybody.
You know, it's much easier. But there is, at the moment, I think there's a sort of, you get to a certain level, and there's lots of good training stuff that happens in Adelaide as well, whether it's through, you know, the arts college or music essay, whatever. But it gets to a certain level, and then it's really difficult, and then that's what hasn't happened. But there are funds available that often people don't know about and things like that to sort of go abroad, learn stuff. So You know, there's a lot of it is just more joined up thinking, and that's obviously, I don't have time to go to it now because we've only got about 40 minutes, but I mean, a lot of my report will be actually about linking up existing things that actually already happen in the city.
Yeah. More high-level stuff. Thanks, Martin. Dean,
I'll make a quick comment. I would have thought one of your biggest strengths at the moment is you've got a premier who's supportive of supporting the arts and live music in particular, which not every state has. So that's a big win. And part and parcel of that is cross-portfolio, cross-government department support. I mean, one of the things that we see at a national level is that there's inherent and obvious support from arts portfolios. What you need, if you're truly going to recognise live music as an industry, which I think is one of the problems we have nationally, is recognising that it is an industry and you've got to invest in it, is how does that work from a whole of government point of view? Other strengths you've got, from APRA Records point of view, perspective, there's about 360 venues presenting live music in South Australia. That's everything from wineries to hotels, cafes, bars. We did an Ernst & Young report with Ernst & Young a few years ago that looked at the economic contribution from venues, 1.2 billion nationally, and we sort of set a goal that wouldn't it be great over the next 5 years if you could get a 10% uplift in that. So if you think about from a South Australian point of view, it's 36 venues, it's not a lot.
Yeah, okay, that's good, thanks Dean. Okay, so this one might seem obvious. I'll throw to Millie and Martin on this. Can you talk about the importance of touring for local bands? You're a local band in Adelaide. How do you front up to national and even international touring, and how important is it?
Look, I think it's incredibly important, but I guess you need to know what kind of an artist you want to be. I don't necessarily think every single artist that comes out of the gate is going to want to be in that touring world. You know, there's a lot of the songwriting component that's just as important and is equally part of the conversation as the live venues is. In terms of those artists that are wanting to tour live, and I think, you know, I would never want to be an artist and get up on stage and do what you guys do. It's unbelievable, but I think that's a part of it. That's the thrill, to be able to perform your craft. In terms of the why you do it, it's income and it's revenue. And I think when you've got an industry where the recorded product is drastically changing and the difference now between physical sales and digital sales is still playing catch up, there is a real capacity for artists to tour, to make money from the shows, from ticketed sales, from merchandise, and the spin-off in terms of actually building their band as a brand and building an audience fan base and having that fan base engage with them, hopefully as a career artist for the life of that artist, and have them going on that journey with them. So in order to do that, you need to get out there and you need to play. And I guess in terms of getting out of Adelaide, I think you're right, the question does stand for itself. There's only so many places you're ever going to play here. There's only a ceiling of audience, particularly if you're in certain genres that aren't so Triple J or aren't so mainstream. You're going to hit a ceiling pretty early on as to those fans that are going to potentially want to come and see you. So looking for the right kind of tribes, if you will, that are interstate. You want to start getting out there, finding like-minded bands that you can do swaps with perhaps, and getting out and getting your chops up more than anything. I think, as much as we do talk about venue issues and venues closing, one thing I do believe Australian artists are really good at is playing damn well live. And I think that's so important and that's crucial in terms of becoming a net exporting nation, in terms of being able to promote our artists overseas. You need to be able to play, and you need to be able to play well. And as much as often that showcase environments, it's a little contrived, you're definitely playing to the industry. You're playing for a purpose, which is hopefully to find some partners and the right people to go on and do future business with. You need to be able to get up there and play in 25 minutes something pretty impressive. Yeah. So you've got to practice that, and you've got to do it by playing in front of live audiences. And the other thing, I'll be really quick, we touched on today in the chat, is if you're a band and you've been playing around Adelaide for a while and you decide or you think that you might want to go to Austin or you want to go to the Great Escape or CMJ in New York, what you don't want to find out is, as a band, you really hate being in a van together, or you really hate travelling together, or one person doesn't wake up on time and misses a lobby call. All of those things you want to find out in Australia before you've dropped 15 to 20k for the privilege of discovering that. So I think there's an element of touring in this country, using all the vehicles that you can just to practice, are we good at travelling and touring together before you go off and do that.
Okay, I think
I
you've
think
seen
the
seen
other
some
thing that I was
interesting
just,
things
if I could jump in quickly, when you tour around as a band, you get to see a lot of other bands as well, which can actually make you realise that you might be shit, or, you know, you might have been watching other bands in Adelaide that weren't the best either. So it can really open your eyes to another standard that you might not know existed, and then you can come back to Adelaide and go, do you know what? We really need to do a lot of work now before we go and do that again, because A, it costs us a lot of money, and B, we're not very good. And that can be a really good thing to know. So, you know, that's a positive for me. You go out there and you realise you need to get better, and that's what touring can do to you, in a way.
Okay, you got a big one on this, Martin?
Well, I totally agree with that, really. Actually, it's always good to have some friends who are honest with you, saying, you know, unfortunately, a lot of musicians are sometimes a bit unrealistic in actually how good they are. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, being able to, I mean, the whole Michael Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, clearly that's very difficult for an Adelaide artist to achieve that, you know. You know, where I live, just south of London, you know, within that 10-hour, the equivalent of the 10-hour drive to Melbourne, you know, there's 100 million people and probably 2,000 venues and fuck knows how many festivals, you know, so you can, if you vaguely get good, you know, that's tough. That's not going to change suddenly. But, you know, once you do get to that next level, you know, you can go and spend the summer in Europe and do lots of shows. So you can catch up. And there are things you can do to sort of make it better. And one of the things we'll be looking at is trying to have more of a regional South Australian touring circuit. Okay, it's not going to be particularly exciting, but as you said, it's actually kind of worth driving to Port Lincoln to find out whether you hate being in a van with somebody.
Yeah, find that out first. Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, and maybe Dean would probably jump on this, Australia in terms of the collecting royalties on your performance income and your live performance revenue happens, I think, quite differently to some of the other countries, and just the sheer playing means you're going to have income coming in if you fill in your live performance return, if you've registered for that collection. So again, it's just that constant, what are the ways that you can look at revenue and monetise what you're doing as well?
Very important revenue stream. I think, as people know, the return from digital sales is a lot less than from analogue sales. We've got new business models where we hope that might change over time. So live touring and your various other revenue streams are incredibly important.
Yeah. Okay. So let me keep moving because I think the Premier does have a commitment, you know, scheduled at the end of this part of the session. I think probably Dean's already covered this, but I'll just ask it quickly anyway and ask Dean maybe to give you any extra thoughts. What's the relationship between having a strong professional industry and having great local bands? Right? And by professional industry, I mean the infrastructure, the managers, the studios, publishers. How important is that link?
Well, I think it's incredibly important, probably for the statement that the Premier made at the beginning, which is if it's truly an industry, then you need to look at the breadth of the industry. There's no point putting all your eggs in one basket and investing in just one part of the industry. It needs to be the whole life cycle. So from an APRA perspective, we're looking at the songwriter, and we would argue that that is the beginning of the life cycle. No song, no industry, full stop. So you've got to look at that. How are we investing in songwriters? And there's ways of doing that. And then where does that flow onto? Where do people get their first gig? What are the different forms and types of venue that people need to be able to play in? And once you step into that zone, to what extent do venues understand presenting live music, and does it work economically for them? And you have to address that question, because if you don't, venues won't present live music. And it flows on, and you get the whole surround of the industry at its greatest breadth then coming into play. But there are obviously some key milestone points that you need to look at and go, do we have that working? Because if you don't get the surrounding professionals wanting to work in that space anyway.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Dean. Okay, so let's just think about, for a minute, the state of venues in the state or in the city. How important are venues to the live scene? And you know, how can you talk about the quality of venues? What makes a good venue that promotes, I guess we're talking original bands that have some hope of being recording artists? How does that all fit together? What sort of venues do you need, and how does that work, and have we got it?
I actually think Adelaide's got some of the best venues in the world. I mean, the Gov this Saturday is having a party for their 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Now, for that size of that venue, which is, what is it, 700, that's one of the best spaces I've been to. And for that to be a family-owned business for 20 years, I think so, you know, pretty astonishing. So I guess Brian and Melissa probably won't be here, but I mean, personally, publicly salute them for the stuff they've brought to Adelaide in the last 20 years. You know, there is obviously a problem with some of the smaller venues in inner city areas with gentrification, and you know, we have in the UK a lot when they brought in the anti-smoke, you know, the smoking regulations, so people want to stand outside and talk loudly. So, you know, you have these problems all over the world, and it's very hard running a 200, 300 capacity live music venue. They run on very narrow margins. So, of course, if you have too much regulation, you know, and then you're told to spend $100,000 and that causes a problem. But those, you know, the places like, you know, the Exeter, the Crown and Anchor, whatever, you know, they are the crucial heartbeats of a city, and they're exactly the places any young backpacker or, you know, any tourist under the age of 30, they're exactly the sort of places they want to go to and see. Oh, that's a cool place. Yeah. But I mean, overall, it's actually at the moment it's not bad. But I mean, you have to be careful because these places can close down very, very easily.
Yeah.
I think the thing about venues in Adelaide is they're businesses, so you know they're out to make money. That's their primary goal, really. You know, there might be some other, you know, they love live music and they want to support it, but at the end of the day, they need to make money to survive, like anything else. So if you look at their business models, in terms of how they deal with live music, there's a couple of different ways they do that. One is, you know, they might pay bands. The venue might pay a band and they let everyone come in for free to watch the show, and they sell beer or alcohol or food or whatever they're selling, and that's how they make money. So it gives, you know, punters can come and watch a band for free, or there's other venues will charge a door charge to get in and they'll keep some of that revenue as well. So there's different ways of running a venue, and I think, you know, there's pros and cons to both for the business, but I think there's also pros and cons to both in terms of creating a scene that values music and as I said before, creating an ecosystem that can actually develop bands to a good level. You know, if you've got, it's kind of economics, I suppose. If you've got 60 venues and you've got 500 bands, how many times do you think each band's going to play in each venue? And, you know, how many times can they drag their friends out to that same gig? And it just becomes too much. Like, there's no hunger from bands to play shows because they can so easily attain a show. And as somebody who books a venue or two venues in Adelaide, this is a problem that I see all the time. You know, bands are so, you know, they want to play, they want to get out and play. So they send an email to a venue. What's the first thing the venue needs to do? They need to book bands to make money to keep the venue ticking over. So we have to put shows on all the time. And, you know, my booking of quality is often thrown straight out the window, because you have to put something on and hope that they bring people. And then, you know, if you're a punter going out to experience live music for the first time, thinking, oh, this might be fun, I might go to a pub. You walk into the pub, maybe you pay $10 to get in, maybe you don't. You go and watch the band. Chances are they're not going to be very good, because at the moment we don't have a very strong system where bands are hungry to be at a high level. We don't have bands out there going, shit, I need to get amazing before I'm even allowed to get a show. Because at the moment, they're going to send their first email to me and I'm going to give them a gig because I have to. I don't have a choice. So if you look at other places like Brisbane or, you know, other cities, they have less venues than Adelaide, and they have heaps more bands and they have heaps more people going to shows. So in my mind, that, you know, and I'm not going to go out and say, let's close 10 venues, because obviously they're businesses, but we are in a weird situation in Adelaide where we have more venues than other places, and we have less bands than those places, and we have less punters going to shows. So it doesn't really create much excitement when you're a punter and you go to a gig and there's 7 people there. You know, it's not a great environment for creating live music fans, and it's not a great environment for creating high quality bands that are going to be able to break out of this city and do other things. So in my mind, that's a bit of a problem.
This quality-quantity trade-off, and try and understand why we've got this pattern.
And also, I think Adelaide, or Australia and Adelaide, I think are a bit behind the loop in terms of artists collecting a database things. There's so many like free things you can use these days to do that, and maybe in the UK we're probably ahead of the loop there. So you know, you would know that. I mean, more and more a promoter in the UK would ask a band, well, how many real email addresses do you have and where they are and whatever, and so which creates a lot more efficiency and if it's like if only 5 people have downloaded your music, then you really shouldn't be trying to do, you should still be rehearsing in your bedroom and trying to create something better and more interesting. I mean, I say that is one of the huge advantages of the new music industry, is that actually there's all these tools, most of which are free, that so long as you're good, you can collect information in and pass that on to guys like Craig and say, actually, or even book the play. More and more bands in the UK now actually would hire the space themselves because they would know that they can send an email out and sell tickets direct to their fans.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're getting up to time on the panel discussion, so I'm keen to get the Premier to respond to a question. And this, feel free to say this might be preempting the report, Premier. But in your view at this time, have you formed any ideas about what the government can do and should do in promoting the well-being of the industry, perhaps responding to the comments tonight or giving us your thoughts at this stage?
Well, I suppose the thing that's excited me is this idea of conceptualising it as an industry. When I first met Martin, the first serious discussion I had with him about this, I was listening to what he was saying about the music industry, and it's almost identical to the discussion I had with Professor Goran Ruse about advanced manufacturing. This whole gaps in the supply chain and that people getting to a certain level and not being able to go to another level, the mentoring, certain sort of expertise not being available in certain elements of the supply chain, all of these things that are actually a common feature of the deficiencies of South Australian business generally was actually applicable to the live music sector. And the other thing I think is important to remember is that people that survive in South Australia are usually better than people elsewhere because it's harder here. So you've carved out a little business, I don't know how, by doing some very clever things. And I think that's actually a bit of a South Australian trait. You need some ingenuity to actually survive in South Australia because you don't have the natural advantages of other places. But it also means there's above average requirement, I think, for government sometimes to actually step in and help with gaps or this notion of partnership. And I think that's what's been turned on to me is the idea of there is a great role here for us to do some simple things, to fill in some of the gaps that are missing, to give access to this sector to a whole range of other things that are available to other business groups that I don't think we've really conceptualised live music as an industry for. So I'm quite excited about this idea, and I think the other bit of it, I suppose, is that we've introduced some changes to the other parts of the agenda on the vibrant city. We've tried to get more people to live in the city. One of the really big things that's happened in the last decade or so is actually students. The number of students that are now living in the city is extraordinary, and it actually is changing the whole economy of the city. And they're obviously an extraordinary source of fans, And the other thing is that we've changed the liquor licensing regime. So we've got the new venues, the new small venues licence, which I think is a real opportunity for new entrepreneurs to actually do something. So I'm quite excited about the coming together of a few things. The focus on the city, the freeing up of some of the regulatory stuff, more people living in the city, and obviously now this debate where we're going to actually diagnose what's missing, what's good, and what we need to do to actually make it better. So I'm really looking forward to Martin's report, and I think we're going to be able to do a lot of the things he's going to recommend.
Okay, thanks, Premier. I'll just throw to the rest of the group, if anyone's got any comments along those lines, brief comments on what government can do, should do.
Yeah, and I guess the thing with what you're saying, Premier, and I think this is where the music industry does stand up over time and time again over other industries, is it's not going to take a lot for your government to do a bit of tweaking here and a little bit of changing here. The music industry is hungry for this. They know how to invest in themselves, I think, in a way a lot of the other creative industries don't. And too much government intervention, I think, can actually be quite detrimental. And we see it a lot with the Canadians, who are incredibly well funded, ridiculously, you know, in terms of a lot of the export opportunities. And the minute the funds might not be there, an opportunity that's just as valid no longer exists for them. It's like, without that, we don't go. And we don't see that with the Australians. I think if you've had a career opportunity that's presented itself, you'll find a way to get there. Like, these South Australian artists are still doing it. It's just going to take that, you know, really looking at the industry and creating that sector. It's not going to be a lot, and I think that's the exciting thing. There's a lot of quick wins. There's a lot of really great people all working towards it, and I think that's incredibly refreshing to hear. The other thing I think too, in terms of being in Adelaide, on the idea of you get to hone your craft in a way I think some of the other states don't. I think having, you know, A&R people galore in different cities, or people that are, you know, gatekeepers, see those bands too quickly. They see them at a live show when they're so not ready, and I think you need to embrace that opportunity that you can actually be in a city where you can develop and get better and better and better, so that when you do hit that international and national stage, you're actually at a really high standard. And I think that's exciting and probably not often looked at as a positive, and I think it's a real positive that Adelaide could embrace more.
Okay.
I should make a quick comment on, I think regulation's key. I think you've got to solve, you don't need a lot, and you don't need a lot of money, and collaborations is definitely the way to go, but you've got to get some of the barriers out of the way. And then I think specifically for venues, and it's not just a South Australia thing, it's the venue development and alongside of that audience development, and that starts to address the supply issue, I think.
I think, you know, one of the things for me that's exciting is we're actually trying to keep people in Adelaide. It's a huge issue. You look at a tour by an international band. We haven't touched on this really, but, you know, international bands won't play in Adelaide because no one will go to their show. The reason no one goes to their show is because everyone who likes music's moved to Melbourne. Like, that's the truth, you know, or even worse, like a band will tour and people who live in Adelaide will go to the Melbourne show, even if there is an Adelaide show. Like, that happens. That's a real thing. So, you know, we've got to start buying tickets to gigs more and keeping people who are interested in music in the city. The more, you know, so many people leave that are interested in music, and that makes it so much harder for, you know, people like me and other people who run music companies in Adelaide to survive, because we have no audience. We keep losing them every 3 years and we have to rebuild them again. And it's, you know, you don't get anywhere. You're just sort of fighting a battle to keep it the same size. So anything the government can do, and I know they've been doing a lot in the City Council to try and make Adelaide more interesting for these people that are leaving, is a really good thing, I think.
Okay, thanks. Martin, any quick thoughts from you on this topic?
No, I think the guys have covered that.
Yeah, okay. All right. I mean, one thing I'd just like to throw into the mix, you know, I think the experience with Gautier and his Grammy single is not lost on anybody. It's a phenomenal achievement, and it's probably the song from last year that people just can't stop hearing. And it seems to me we've got the resources of the South Australian Film Commission, we've got this tradition of visual arts. We could also work at the level of trying to put music and arts and visual stuff together, recognising the era of YouTube and digital distribution. Just a thought I'm throwing out there. But we've got about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes before we have to go. So I'd just like to throw to the audience. I think we've got some logistics with microphones. We'll have to share a couple here at the front. So just put your hand up, yep, and say who you are and who you'd like to direct your question to. Sure.
Thank you for this event. My name is Patrick O'Grady, and I have a vision. The vision is Port Road, Hindmarsh, where you have 4 or 5 large casinos. That's my vision.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Who else? There was someone right down the back there. Oh, sorry, it's right down the back. Yep, he's had his hand up first. Can we get another microphone roving somehow? Oh, we have, thanks.
My name's Luke Penman. I run a blog and a podcast and a radio show all about local music. I'm also put on one of the last shows at the Jade Monkey before it closed down, and I felt very, very close to this movement, this project, as we're calling it. I'd first of all like to start by saying thank you to Mr. Weatherill, Mr. Elbourne for being here and all the work that you've put in here. And it is tough work because my experience that I've experienced throughout this project is that the creative industries, and seemingly particularly music, when we ask for help and you try and give it to us, we're generally a bunch of pretty grumpy cunts. And
You've been
and
talking
I'm no
to Mark?
exception. One of the things that concerns me and has concerned me about this is that the straw that broke the camel's back was the Jade Monkey. Let's face it, we all know that. 4,000 people signed a petition to say that this place was something very special and very important towards Adelaide's live music scene. And Reverb, as the slide up there says, this is about Adelaide's live music movement. Mr. Elbourne is here, our thinker in residence for live music in Adelaide.
We're needing a question.
The majority of what I've heard, there is a question, sorry. The majority of what I've heard about is talking about bands being able to get out of Adelaide. My question is, what things have you seen and what things are we trying to work on to actually work on the audience development for the venues that we already have, for the things in this town? Okay. I'm not in Melbourne. I don't want to go to Melbourne to see an Adelaide band. I want to keep venues here. I want to keep bands here. And I want more audience here. What steps have you seen? What, I guess, goals are we aiming towards?
Okay, audience development. I might ask Martin to respond to that.
Sorry, I got a little bit lost about halfway through that thing. I was actually going to start this thing off by saying you're not allowed to mention the Jade Monkey or Jimmy Barnes. But I would say that there are two areas where you could definitely improve the situation here for not much effort. One is the whole listings, the way people find out about what's on is actually not very good. And that's possibly an area where the government could help in terms of actually, helping set up a really good website. And as I say, I mentioned it before, collecting the data, but no one's really working together, properly collecting databases, sharing databases. I think that would make a major difference. And I also think a personal thing is gigs should stop before public transport stops. I think there's a bit of bad thing that way, but going to one of them.
I think going on to Luke's point about why we're talking about bands leaving Adelaide, the reason why we're talking about that is because we need successful bands here that are from this city that actually have a fan base that people want to go and watch them. What does that do? It gives us, say we had 10 bands that were touring around, they could sell 1,000 tickets in every city in Australia, and they were all from Adelaide. That would give us a real, almost things to look to that can actually build a fan base locally and make people want to go to gigs. Whereas right now, we don't really have a huge number of bands that are doing amazingly well from Adelaide. So there's not much interest, but then a band comes over from Sydney and they're on Triple J and 300 people will go to the show. So I'd like to get to a point where we have successful bands that can tour and can play in Adelaide and can help build an overall audience for live music, build more music fans. That's what I think we're trying to do. Okay,
thank you. We've only got the Premier for another 5 minutes. Has anyone got a question for the Premier? Who?
Me.
Who's got their hand up? Okay, you do? Okay, yeah, go.
I've heard a lot of talk about music, being looked at as an industry, but what I think is missing is the commensurate look at how the musician is developed. So you've got people saying, putting all the onus on the young bands and saying, you have to get out there and you have to promote yourselves and you have to bid for this lot of funding. And I don't see the support, this ecosystem, this infrastructure to support the young bands as they try and develop. This is an industry where people will take people for free or for beers or, food at the door. They won't pay them properly. And yet people are saying, spend your 5 years trying to get paid, trying to develop your skills. We have some exceptionally talented musicians in South Australia that struggle to make a living because there aren't sufficient venues, because nobody's looked properly at the overarching infrastructure. How do you expose young bands at school? Where's the proper transition? You compare it to the advanced manufacturing. Nobody expects a young person to work in advanced manufacturing for free. Nobody expects somebody to turn up at a workplace and then not get paid.
Okay, so we need a question.
These are the structural issues that nobody seems to properly address. If you're looking at a vibrant city in Adelaide, you need to look at how you license those venues, what sort of structures you can put in place, what sort of proper industrial support, so that these young people who are out there trying to make a living truly have some business skills and some support that will allow them to do this proper development. We don't expect it in any other...
So what can we do to improve the incomes of musicians? Is that,
well, yeah, but I think, you know, the reality of the world live music industry is when you're starting off, you get paid fuck all. That is just not going to change anything that
It's a global
recommend.
problem. It's a global problem. We can't change that. That's the way the industry is. I don't think we can do much about that.
Sorry?
well, this...
People download music for free. Stop doing that, and there'll be more money in the industry.
I mean, you should give... I mean, any new band has to give away their music for free to get email addresses. That's just...
I think we should... This is
when
a very
you start
big
playing
issue.
gigs, you play for nothing because you need the experience.
Yeah.
Until you justify... I mean, it's
an internship.
live music is actually one of the most sort of capitalist industries in the world, which is both good and bad. But I mean, you can't you know, there are countries in the world that insist on minimum payments, and they have terrible live music industries.
Yeah, I think we probably need to note that some people want some explanation why you have to play for nothing or pay to play, as the expression goes, and I guess we'll cover that. So, any more questions for the Premier? Down here, this woman has had a hand up for a while. Sorry about that.
I have two. My name's Mary Harrington. I have two questions. One is, do you think that we should have just a special entertainment district in Adelaide where no apartments are and the incumbent issues that engender?
Yep.
The first. And the second one is that we're talking about the young live music industry. Those, and we want to keep them in our city and our state. Those young people are going to get older and they're going to still love their music, presumably. But as you get older, you have different issues with accessibility, and now my second question is, what sort of infrastructure do you envisage the older people who are interested in the live entertainment industry, as far as accessibility around the city? I suppose I live in the city, so I can walk everywhere, but people actually have to come into the city. So
yeah. Okay, so maybe we've heard a word on that on public transport, but I think the precinct idea is an interesting one.
Look, just maybe going to that second question first. I mean, one of the great advantages of Adelaide, it's a very radial city, so you can come in to the centre and you don't have to live in the middle of it. I think the way Adelaide people like the city is they want the city to be more exciting, but they want their suburbs to be sleepy and peaceful and family friendly. And then you can stay there, you don't have to come in, or you can come in from time to time, or you can stay right in the middle of it. And at different times in your life, different of those mixes might work for you. So I think, you know, I'd like to think of the city as a place that, you know, has a different attraction for you at different times of your life, and obviously the venues need to be accessible for people if for no other reason, disability access, leaving aside the age demographic. So I think that's a minimum basic requirement of our venues. But your first question about a precinct, I mean, I think there's some complex issues about land use conflicts, and obviously people a lot of these venues have been there first, and then the gentrification of the city is meaning we're getting these land use conflicts. I mean, I'm in the corner of the venues there, frankly. If they're first, I think there should be a way of protecting. Otherwise, we just destroy the very thing to attract people to the city. I don't understand why you'd move into the city and then try and shut down the thing that attracts people to the city. So that's my... But Martin, I'm really pinching. I don't really know very much about this. I only tell you what experts tell me about these things. But Martin was talking to me about what he thought was really an organic precinct that no doubt he'll talk about, and that is around the Light Square area. I mean, there are lots of venues and lots of arts institutions, all in a very short distance, and not a lot of residences, so there's not a lot of existing land use conflict. I mean, I think we've got some ready-made precincts that we could enliven and invest in.
Yeah, briefly on that. I mean, you got between Jive and Fowler's, and you've got the Arts College there. You got the Media, I'm going to get its name right, Media Resource Centre there for the young filmmakers, music essays there, and there's a few other things there. There's kind of like an obvious sort of, at least creative training quarter that sort of, and obviously if we could get the music side of the Arts College back into the city centre area, you'd have a really buzzing area. I mean, yeah, sorry. Questions for Craig before we go? Just here.
Well, I'm happy to advocate for that. I'm happy to push for that.
Yes.
Frank Lang, bass player, singer, long-time trier. Central Building District, we've got a lot of suburbs, youth. We have a lot of great players, singers, songwriters, musicians that live in the suburbs that have had a go and perhaps success for a year or two. And let's face it, out of the whole population of South Australia, every year I don't think more than 2% have a shot at it. That shot, the milk run might last for 2 years, and then you come back to Adelaide to live and to continue as a musician. So could we please also include the suburbs? Has anybody mentioned the Semaphore Workers Club? And could we mention the suburbs and give people that want to continue to play in this state after they've had a shot at the fame and the fortune? And could we please not pay bands $100 for 5 people to play at a venue? It is possible to do, and that's where we should be aiming, Mr. Premier and Mr. Elbourne. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, we've got just in the middle, the guy in the black, his hand up.
G'day, my name's William Parton. I'm from a South Australian band called Bill Parton Trio. Mr. Weatherill, with regards to the Arts SA funding, there's definitely a shared sentiment, in my humble opinion, amongst fellow musicians that it's A, a very competitive process, B, there are a lot of worthy projects missing out on funding, and C, it's a lengthy and almost futile process. Any chance you could tip a bit more money into the Arts SA funding allocation?
Well, I'd like to actually. I actually do think that the whole live music thing is an area of focus that we probably haven't invested in as much as we do obviously with other art forms. I think there is a case for that. Obviously we haven't been able to do it in this budget, but I do want to revisit that whole question, and I'd like to find out a bit more about what we do provide at the moment and what would make a difference.
So wasn't it a nexus between the state government and the poking industry to put the money garnered from the poking industry to go back to live music, because the venues are participating, not there? talking to me at Adelaide Symphony Orchestra at lunchtime, not on my one. And I'm just wondering where, I mean, there must be a percentage of the pokey money that goes back into the Jewish. Is that happening?
Yeah, that's happening. That's Arts SA. I think that's $500,000.
Pokey money for musicians.
Yeah.
Okay, so down here.
It stayed stable. My understanding of it is it's $500,000, and that's what it's been for a very long time, which someone told me was 8 hours of pokey revenue.
Okay.
So
Let's keep moving.
Premier, Alistair Crenny from Gorgeous Festival and formerly from Fuse. A couple of quick questions. Surely we fund a lot of film projects through the Film Corporation, and that money is tied to a percentage of cinematography and editors all being based in South Australia, but currently we don't tie that funding to a percentage of the soundtrack being South Australian. And so we could grow the music industry without spending another cent, simply with a small legislative change. My second question is why large organisations like the Adelaide Festival with bucket loads of government funding put on clearly commercial shows like Neil, Finn and Paul Kelly for free, thereby devaluing music and encouraging the general population that you don't have to pay for music. As a commercial promoter, I couldn't book Neil, Finn and Paul Kelly because they want $140,000 for that show. No one's going to buy a ticket because they just saw it for free, paid for with government funding through the Adelaide Festival.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm with you on that one, but on the first bit about government procurement, I think, that's one thing that we've had our eyes open to a bit. I don't think it's just the Film Corporation. I think there's a whole range of things that tourism and a whole range of agencies use particular music to promote various elements of their activities, whether it be online or commercials. I think that's an area we haven't really attended to in terms of local content, and I think that's something we could certainly look at.
Okay, so
just quickly on the Neil Finn show thing, my disagreement with that show was I can understand why they want to do a free show, the opening of the festival, rest of it, and obviously South Australia's one of those festivals. What I thought was bad about that was that they should have said you should have had to apply online for your free tickets and give an email address. It was completely wasted opportunity.
if you applied online for that email and then those emails were made available to promoters that could use them to sell tickets to those people, that would be a good idea.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions. So there's a couple of people in the middle at the back who've had their hands up for ages.
Hi.
Or are they just sort of stretching?
No, I have a microphone, see? I've been trying to think of how I can pose this as a question. So why won't anyone recognize that this shouldn't specifically be about success? It should be about the grassroots level community and allowing that to happen by having the real small venues and by letting people play that aren't brilliant yet. Because anytime you try and manufacture higher level success consciously, I don't think it works. I think success grows organically, like everyone keeps saying. There are very, very few exceptions, and you have someone mentioned Gotcha, that was a phenomenon. But that didn't come from nowhere. He's been around for 10, 12 years, and we've got a CDR at Radio Adelaide that he sent us. And that's grassroots level, no one will let him play type thing. And also, I just wanted to say that perhaps the reason some of these questions are so long is because we don't get a chance to talk very much, but you guys do.
Good comments, thank you. Okay, one more. This gentleman down here, sorry, the one behind you, he's had his hand up for ages, in the middle. We might have time for you just after this. Is this a quick question?
It is a very quick question. My name is Matthew Hayward. I manage Steering by Stars and have been involved as a booker for the Hotel Metropolitan. I'm sitting next to someone who's an established artist who has toured internationally, and people who have all around me have toured interstate. My question is, we brand and promote wines in South Australia. Why don't we have an office? Why don't we have, what am I trying to say? Why don't we have a trade office for music? Because we promote our music at the Australian Barbecue, for South by Southwest and CMJ, but we don't have that state body that really promotes our music. We don't hear our music in Tourism SA ads. we hear interstate musicians.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about some of
but
that.
I mean, effectively, that is going to be one of like recommendations.
Well, my question being, what is your vision for that?
Well, I think there's a general agreement there needs to be some sort of music industry development thing. But part of that is obviously going to be pushing it as part of tourism and whatever. It's linking up the dots. I don't think there's any real. I mean, I think there's been changes in arts, I say, policy. I don't think there's any real disagreement about the need for something like that. Where it actually sits and who does it, the rest of it, obviously, there's a devil in the detail. But the broad principle, I don't think anyone would disagree with.
I mean, I think that's the role of an industry association, and I think advocating for South Australian artists in that capacity, certainly locally and in the same way that other businesses are. On the international front, I guess the idea of having each state represented just adds a whole other level and layer that's really unnecessary. I think when you look at export and you're looking at trying to really cut through some of these bigger events, whether it's, you know, as an artist or as an industry person trying to develop your pathway and form business relationships, we're lucky they don't know that we're Austria. You know, the idea of then going, we're Queensland, we're Victoria, we're New South Wales, it's just too much. I mean, I think when you start to get at that level, having the national branding and having the states all feed into it, along with federal funding, is actually working and making for a much greater impact. I think when you start to look at, you know, certainly again, I feel like I'm bashing Canada. I really love Canada, but they have just every single province, city, suburb has so much money that they're all trying to push themselves. You need at least some point that unified platform, and I think having South Australia work locally to really build that, I think you're totally right with sort of tourism ads. That's an industry body. That's what an industry association should be doing. They're the sorts of things they should be looking for. And, you know, you need to talk to those people that are doing those roles to really encourage that, because I think that's where that state advocacy becomes really important and then feeds into national activity.
Okay, the gentleman here has been very persistent. One more question.
Okay.
It's on.
It's on, okay. I'm Peter Love. I've been a co-presenter of a world music program on community radio for over 30 years, and I've attended every Adelaide festival that's been held. I want to take it in a different way, and that is we pride ourselves on being a multicultural state and city, and yet you've got all these different cultural groups. They run their own shows, their own festivals in isolation, most of them. They don't get hardly any publicity. And as a consequence, they're small. I think that they have a lot to contribute to the cultural wealth of South Australia. And what I'd like to suggest is that we have something like a multicultural festival of music and dance, not just music, because the two go together, held at a different time than the Mad March, so that we run it, or it's run along the lines of a fringe festival, so that people book their own venues, which can be of any size depending on what of any size depending on the particular group, and they get, because it's a fringe type festival, they get assistance with publicity.
Okay, so I'm going to take that, as Tony Jones says, I'm going to take that as a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, but
I hear what you're saying.
I'm asking if such an idea has merit with the government and with our thinker in residence, because
if you think it's a great idea, why don't you just do it? I mean, I've set up 15 festivals, including WOMAD.
Yeah.
Only one of them's had public money going in to make it happen. We just made it happen.
Yeah, well...
I mean, obviously there's a role for government in putting seed capital in sometimes, but it's like...
Okay, so we've got that one.
The other thing is for the publicity side of it. At the moment, these...
No, I agree. On publicity side, that's a different... I agree with you. There, the city, the state needs to be much better coordinated, and I think it should be run by the industry eventually, but it should be... Maybe there's a role possibly for government to do, you know, just to get the basic bare... I'm not a techie person, but, you know...
The only publicity that they get is through community radio or most of the publicity, or the street magazines like Rip It Up and DB.
But is there a market for that though?
They're largely ignored by the commercial media unless they're paying lots for advertising. And
okay, so we're pushing. Thank you for that. We're pushing our time, and Martin's got that on board, I think. Look, I know there's a couple more questions, and some of you have been persistent, but we're really just about at time. So I'd just like to thank the panel and the Premier in particular for putting in the time, and join with me in that. I think we're going to wrap. So thank you, and I'm glad no one's frozen to death in the Scott Theatre tonight, as far as I can tell anyway. Thank you for coming along, and we welcome your suggestions and participation going forward ahead of Martin's final report. Thanks a lot.